And here we are, at the last letter of the alphabet. Feels a bit weird that I've already covered an alphabet's worth of mythical monsters. Time really flies, but I shouldn't reminisce on the past as the list of creatures that are yet to come is almost endless. Once again, as it has lately become a custom of the series, I've put this up to a vote in my Discord server, and we have a clear winner. Now, the name Zaratan might not ring too familiar for most of you, but stories of it and similar creatures are relatively well known, so I'm certain part of it will be recognizable. The word Zaratan is the Middle Eastern version of the Aspidochelone, but there are some distinct differences between the two, so I'll separate them. Let's talk about the namesake of the video first. The Zaratan is most commonly described as a vast turtle, more immense than any creature we know of, so ginormous that it can be mistaken for an island. These beasts float on the surface of the ocean with a carapace resembling a rocky surface, covered in crevices, trees, greenery, and occasionally sandy beaches. As you might have guessed, some sailors fall for this trap. In fact, this is the only kind of story the combined brain capacity of humanity has been capable of coming up with when it comes to the creatures I'll be covering here. The sailors spot the island, drop anchor, usually right on the beach just to tempt fate, disembark, then build a massive campfire. The burning flames heat up the back of the Zaratan, which decides to plunge into the depths to remedy this. All those on his back are dragged along, only a few surviving. Now, how exactly these seasoned sailors managed to miss the enormous shape of the flippers, tail and head of the beast just under the surface is another question entirely, as is the fact that a puny little campfire manages to heat up the extreme thickness of the tectonic plate of a carapace, but I guess we'll have to just go along with those. Even though the story beats mostly match, there are a few variations on this still, even rather famous ones. Sinbad the sailor, on his first travel, like the very first, sets foot on such an island beast. He is one of the people the captain decides to abandon in the middle of the ocean because he just happened to catch a sweet favorable gale and fucking off seemed like the best thing to do. I guess he was afraid the monster might come back to menacingly submerge again. Sinbad manages to survive, but he is of no interest to us beyond this brief encounter. What's interesting about this story is that the island monster is translated as a whale. Now, the Zaratan is not mentioned here by name, but the high number of similarities does suggest that it was at least inspired by it. Additionally, it just so happens that the other version or versions of this creature are also often referred to as whales, often interchangeably with turtles. These can be attributed to many factors. First off, back in the day, anything that swam was considered to be fish, even turtles. As an added fact, whales were, for a very long time, pictured as giant fish, and rather generic fish at that. Not only were whales rarely encountered, few ever saw what they look like beyond rotting carcasses on a beach. While the Zaratan itself is more often referred to as a turtle, the line is a lot blurrier for the next couple beasts. The earliest mention of island monsters likely comes from the Physiologus, a Christian bestiary written in Greek, which can be dated back to the 2nd century AD. Within, one can find the Aspidochelone, or shield turtle, which was likely the inspiration for the Zaratan as well. Over the ages, it has been referred to as Aspidochelone, Aspidochelone, Aspado turtle, or simply as Asp turtle, but these are mostly corruptions of the original. We are not finished with the list of names though, riveting stuff I know. So in the Old English Physiologus, beside being referred to as both whale and asp turtle, the Aspidochelone name is used, which roughly means floater of ocean streams. Since most of these accounts likely derive from the same or very similar sources, there's not much variation in the description. The Aspidochelone is a stony-skinned sea monster. Due to its massive size as well as the sand and seaweed covering parts of it, it resembles an island. So far very similar to a Zaratan. Based on the name and the nature of its hide, you'd be forgiven to think that this is also a turtle. However, further details do seem to suggest it's a whale. It is said that the Aspidochelone emits a sweet scent from its mouth, which attracts smaller fish. When schools of these animals swim inside a gaping maw, it is shot, trapping and consuming the unsuspecting victims. While the perfume is not exactly an accurate description of this hunting method, I do believe this refers to a baleen whale or rorqual. Their skin is kind of rough, spotted by protrusions, feathering and the occasional bouquet of barnacles, or in other words, stone-like. They use their massive jaws to gulp up huge amounts of krill and small fish, so that's a relatively good fit as well. However, I struggle to picture any sailors stupid enough to drop anchor for a picnic atop a whale, especially since they do not just float in place. Also, it is occasionally mentioned that their island-like disposition actually serves to lure ships, intentionally plunging them into the depths. Other times the luring is unintentional, but the drowning still happens via stakes with ropes tied around them, which are driven into the back of the beast. Once again though, it is consistently cited that the fire wakes the monster, not the massive wooden poles hammered into its flesh. Yeah, I can't really see this as anything other than tall tales, just like the next part. Since the physiologus is ultimately a text with religious connotations, it does moralize many creatures within its pages. As such, the sweet perfume emitted by the whale represents earthly temptations, and the fish following the scent are the sinners who choose to engage it, ending up in hell. Indeed, the Aspidochelone and subsequently the whale are both linked to the devil. What's even weirder is that another animal, one likened to Christ, shares a rather similar property. The panthers of medieval bestiaries are described to also emit a sweet smell from their mouth. However, unlike the infernal marine mammal, the panther means no harm to the animals that follow this pleasant scent. I mean, neither of these animals have the capability to breathe air freshener, but if they did, I doubt the whale would be the one tearing their audience apart. Religious misconceptions apart, this is not the only run-in of the Aspidochelone with Christianity. A relatively well-known story involves one, and this story was pretty big back in the day if depictions are anything to go by. Seriously, this image keeps showing up all over medieval manuscripts and maps. As you can already see, it's one with the usual motions, but does have a minor twist and a few variants. This tale is part of the 7-year journey of the Irish Saint Brendan, when he was looking for the fabled Island of Saints, or equivalent. Just like all the sailors before, him and his crew saw a small island and decided to celebrate Easter Mass there. Sometimes it's the commotion, other times the traditional blazing fire set on its back. The island whale decides to bail. However, since the monks have divine plot armor, the creature begins rumbling first and plunges only once everyone safely returns to the ship. Later, Brendan tells his men that he had a chat with God, who said that the enormous fish was actually Jasconius. Yes, another name. It's actually a Latinized version of the Irish word for fish, very imaginative too. Supposedly the animal is constantly trying to reach his tail with his head, but is too big to achieve that. Now, there is one more significantly different version of this, for the extra-religious. Jasconius in this story is not equated with the devil, so much so that he is referred to as a creature of God in this variant. As such, he is chill with Brendan finishing the mess on his back. It's not specified whether or not a fire is constantly burning on his back in the meantime. You've seen quite a few images of this incident, as well as others so far. You might have also noticed that they don't really depict a whale, just a big fish. I've already alluded to artists lacking the knowledge to draw whales with any accuracy, but this does create a bit of a link. While the Aspidochelone is not always referred to as a whale, its depictions can be equated with ones that are actually meant to be just that. Hence we transition from legendary gigantic sea monsters to the usual murky waters of misconceptions. I'd like to grab this opportunity I presented myself to talk a bit about the medieval image of whales. One rather fitting excerpt comes from a mid-15th century chart. While the actual document was lost to time, a manuscript from the same era preserved parts of it, including the aforementioned legend. It reads,
"In the Indian Ocean there are whales which are so large that they seem to be islands, and sometimes, because of the soil that they have on them, plants grow on their backs. Men crossing the sea sometimes land on these whales, which, when they feel the movement of men on them, hurry down into the depths, and so the men are drowned."
Sounds familiar? This tale practically equates the Aspidochelone with the real animal, as only the breath weapon is missing. Additionally, this gives us further ammunition to expose the island, sandy back and vegetative cover as nothing but embellishments. These features aren't even usually featured on the illustrations, and when they are, it just seems like some nasty disease. Perhaps the most famous old story involving whales depicted as enormous fish is the one involving Jonah. But I'm only going to mention it here without going into the details of the incident. Not because some transcendent individuals think that the whale was in fact an alien submarine, yes, there are such brainless wasting our finite natural resources, but because it has no link to our titular Zaratan or the Aspidochelone beyond it being a huge aquatic animal. The only thing worth noting here is that Jonah was swallowed whole, then regurgitated, just like the majority of YouTube content. While in this particular instance the whale was once again a servant of God, like I said, it has actually been more prevalently associated with the devil back in the day. Coincidentally, its correlation with all things infernal can be attributed to the run-in with Jonah. Isidore of Seville in relation to the incident wrote that the belly of the whale is so immense that it resembles hell. As such, numerous depictions of the gates of hell actually feature the gaping jaws of these aquatic mammals. Well, on this image it looks more like a dog, but that's due to the aforementioned lack of anatomical knowledge. With this, we've taken a thorough look at the Zaratan and the Aspidochelone, as well as a brief glimpse at medieval whales. Seriously, that's a beast of a subject, I've only provided an overview. However, we're not finished, as I've done with 25 creatures already, time to design a realistic Zartan. Yeah, not going to be particularly easy. This immense size, comparable to an island, as well as soil and vegetation on its back, are not something you'll just see in nature. Even though the blue whale is the largest animal ever to have lived according to our current knowledge, I'd still not call it island-sized. They are long for sure, but not nearly wide enough to seem like a landmass. Not to mention how just floating idly with their backs out is not exactly typical behavior. Going larger is not exactly an option though, as these animals themselves struggle to sufficiently power their entire body through metabolism above a certain size, and individuals larger than 33 meters are likely impossible. Just imagine the immense distances everything in their body has to travel. Although this massive disposition is justifiable due to their feeding habits. A larger mouth means more krill. As such, they may have reached the cap of what is possible under the current or possibly even the past conditions of this planet. Hence, even for this hypothetical animal, we'll have to take the island size as embellishment. Also, while the fish luring scent and general image of rorquals might better fit the Aspidochelone, I'd rather opt in for a turtle for a couple of reasons. The Zaratan's back needs to be rocky and covered in some sort of plant life, which is more feasible this way. The plates of the shell could be seen as either jagged or smooth rocks, based on what we'll go with. Also, while whales are only covered with barnacles and lice, all turtles with a glade of seaweed on their back are not unheard of. Loggerhead sea turtles have recently been found to spend a lot of time among seaweed, both shortly after hatching and throughout their life. Since the waters they frequent are fit for the plant to thrive and the shell presents a surface to latch onto, a green loan can occasionally be observed on the back of elderly individuals. While these are underwater plants, I don't think terrestrial greenery would find purchase on the carapace and survive the frequent submerging. On the other hand, aquatic species can survive a degree of exposure to dry air. These are the main reasons I'd have the Zartan be a turtle, but how big can we go? The Archalan is the largest known sea turtle, a 4.5 meters long beast that lived in the late Cretaceous. Unfortunately though, not only did it sport a leathery shell, similar to leatherback turtles, but it was also unlikely to have frequented the surface. Now the shell actually highlights a significant issue. While we very much need the carapace to be made out of hard keratin plates, it might give too much additional weight to an already lumbering behemoth. While the aquatic traversal may give more leeway, we need to keep in mind that the females would still have to lay their eggs on dry land. Anything that hinders the establishment of future generations is not going to benefit a species. It is not exactly known how Archalan have gone extinct, but it is unlikely that a lack of protection was the culprit. Even our modest patches of living land seem less likely by the minute. However, it seems like we are not too far over what is physically still functional if the stupendomus genus is anything to go by. While these ancient side-neck turtles lived in fresh water, their carapace was just what we are going for. They sported a still respectable size at just over 3 meters of length shell-wise. Thus, if we were to design a sea turtle, presumably one genetically closer to the Chelonidae family than the Archeleon, we might just need a bit of a compromise to meet the sweet spot. I'd say we should shoot for the 4-meter shell, as anything less is probably on the verge of being too small to be considered land, even in the tall tales of mariners. So how can we drop a bit of weight to prevent our Zaratan from being too cumbersome? We shouldn't go the bird route, as hollow bones would kind of undermine the usefulness of a shell, especially one the animal cannot retract into. Losing limbs is not exactly feasible either. However, there are 2 options we could take in tandem. First off, since the turtle would spend much of its time along the ocean floor, only swimming up to take a breath or traveling to shore for egg laying, the plastron would not see much use at all. We should be very careful with omitting any part of it though, as it practically is the ribcage of the animal. However, one notable change is possible, which just might be what we need. Essentially, we can reduce its size compared to the length and width of the carapace. There is no need to completely match that monstrosity of a shell, which would also mean that the animal housed within has a decreased mass. If parts of the carapace hang over the rest of the reptile, not only does it lighten the load, it is also a semi-viable feature to substitute the ability to retract, offering slightly higher protection. However, I would not thin it or weaken its structure. While the attacks from above would be the most common, if a predator of sufficient size manages to bite the Zaratan from the side, the shell needs to hold against the pressure. While limbs might still get significantly damaged, that's something all sea turtles have to live with. Dismemberment is a preferable alternative to death, even though it does often lead to death. So we've shaved off a bit of excess weight with that, but remember, we've made a roughly 30% increase to the species we modeled, so that's likely still too cumbersome to be competitive. Hence the second option we should take. We could simply flatten our Zaratan. The 2 things that really matter for us are the width and length of the carapace. The beast underneath does not need to be a chunky boy. Hence, a slender turtle that is all about blending in with the environment, slowly moving along the bed of seaweed, offering few opportunities to any predators. Therefore, we have a species, likely belonging to Chelonidae, that has managed to obtain a size and level of protection where it is left to its own devices, granting it a quite significant niche. Since the enormous shell restricts its movement, making it a relatively slow swimmer, it would definitely not be an active hunter. When it comes to choosing its diet, there is only one viable choice really. We cannot have them eat schools of fish, as those would be too quick. The alluring scent would have a hard time working or evolving for a turtle, even though a chemical excretion that reminds fish of food is a possibility, as fishermen also use such tactics. Its improbability and the fact that we are working with a strict budget make it less of an option. All in all, I would personally rule out ambush tactics altogether. While the fact that the animal does not need to move would support the idea of greenery finding its way onto their backs, as well as conserve energy, there is too much randomness involved to sustain this massive body. A massive body that is likely detrimental to an ambush predator. A rather high upkeep for no real benefit. From what we know of the Archeleon, it scavenged the seabed looking for invertebrates to consume, providing it an almost constant inflow of plentiful food, something that was likely necessary to maintain the size, or possibly the very reason they could obtain it. An abundant, easy to obtain food source is the angle I'd personally opt for with Zaratan, as that seems the most fit to satiate its needs and serve as the support that allows such a size. Now, I would not constrain the Zaratan to sea animals solely, as herbivorous tendencies are not uncommon among other sea turtles, since they would spend much of their time in massive fields of seagrasses or moss, perhaps even kelps and other seaweed. Some habitual grazing is perfectly viable. It is also important to note that densely vegetated areas usually offer additional warmth, which may also play a role in the maintenance of such a large body. Hence, the perfume breath is another thing we'll have to chalk up as fiction, or resulting from their confusion with whales in this hypothetical scenario. As I've already mentioned, their usual habitats, the dense vegetation and the surface of their shells, would after a while give way to a long covered carapace, whether just below the surface or emerging in its entirety when the turtle swims up for fresh air. sailors would surely be rather amazed and amused by the animal. These could be exaggerations, or based on the belief that these are but juvenile beasts that will one day make up islands, but I leave that for you to decide. So we've only mentioned adult ones so far, but there is an interesting advantage the hatchlings might have. Born from larger eggs with a wider shell, these little fellas might not be fit for avian consumption. Even though their shells would be relatively malleable as they scurry towards the ocean, it might still be too big to feed the throat of lesser or even medium-sized birds. Gluttony could easily lead to suffocation, a little something to balance out their slow movement. Now, some of you might have hoped for a Zaratan that has a symbiotic relationship with the plants on its back. However, that is a difficult thing to justify. Animals that possess the capacity to photosynthesize use chloroplasts obtained from plants. These mini-reactors are located within the body and offer a supplementary way to sustain themselves. Having a sea turtle take this route, evolving a way to harbor chloroplasts within their shell, is an extreme stretch. The keratin plates would be completely unfit to facilitate the exchange of energy and matter between the body of the turtle and the greenery covering the back. Additionally, further expanding this idea by having the turtle evolve rather specific plant-like organs on its back that improve photosynthesis is another monumental leap. Now, it is important to note that there are ways to design such an animal, which might even allow for a larger size, as a larger surface means a more effective garden. However, that would require changes to the carapace, likely making it impossible to be rock-like, hence undermining a prominent aspect of the Zaratan. All in all, I feel the version I've created here is a better fit for the island beast. Let's save the idea of photosynthetic animals for future endeavors. So this is the realistic Zaratan in all its glory. I know some of you were hoping for nothing short of kaiju, but that's not something we could realistically have under earthly conditions. Still, a 4-meter patch of moving land would be quite a sight to behold. And with this, the first A to Z series is complete. Well, not quite. Beside the fact that I'll have a video correcting some of the mistakes, inaccuracies and omissions I've made, I've got something special for you in store. I aim to cap off the series by dissecting a monster crafted by you, the community. I've compiled a form that contains all sorts of randomized excerpts from various mythological creatures and stories, each potentially answering a question about this fake beast. If you'd like to craft your own variant, click the link in the description. Answers with the highest scores will be canonized, making a monster from the most popular choices. I've already posted it on my Discord, which you should totally join, as well as in a community post, but in case you've missed it, this is a perfect opportunity to participate. I'll be accepting answers for quite a while, as I'm currently working on other stuff, so no need to rush. Anyways, thanks for watching the video to the end, really appreciate it. Hope to see you next time as well. Bye!